Ian Carson, DCarsonCPA, MFC on the lines. When you see the whiteboard, that's because we're giving you the plain, simple lines for the project, process, and advisory points. There's a broad map. Won't get into the specific details, but we'll give you the general lines of accounting, tax, financials, and taxation, points where we can help. A quick view that we sketched out for some points we wanted to share with you. We're calling it simple lines in accounting, financials, and taxation. And we're going to bring you the points, focusing first on the entity lines and how it connects to the community lines from different points. We'll cover a few of the relevant factors and we'll be out. We'll try to keep it brief and swift, but it's all value-added lines to help and where we connect on concept. Essentially what happens here is you have a man or a woman, they're contributing value to entities. The value they contribute to entities is labor and intellectual capital, those type of things, in exchange for their services to an entity, which we will briefly explain what an entity is. They receive in return their paycheck or whatever source of remuneration. And essentially what happens is that becomes a part of the expenses and the financials here. An expense line of payroll, benefits, health, retirement is a pretty substantial line of any business. That brings up the first point. We can definitely help with strong skills in the human capital expenses. The next point of line I'd like to bring is the industry lines here, which we'll now define as industry and business, entity lines, which we now define as industry and business, government lines being executive, legislative, or judicial, small business lines, mom and pop in business, the corner store, or even, different types of businesses, nonprofits being, community centers, sports and recreations, health, religion, education, all the history, all the many great things that happen out of nonprofits. There's a connecting line here for all these points, and, nowadays, many of these things are up in the cloud, so it makes ICT, mobile, and cloud innovation fun because what you're thinking about is one of the decisions in technology within the financials is will you maintain the technology within the business, the government, mom and pop business, or the nonprofit or NGO, or are you going to work with some external lines? And if so, you need some strategy. So that's another point where our cross skills in accounting, financials, taxation, and the back lines in ICT, mobile, and cloud can be helpful because you're going to have to do some strategizing if you're lifting up data from here to there. On the first tier, obviously, we can help in financial lines, but we also have a good line to the OCR data, which is other character recognition data, for text and financial basis information, which is relevant to every business. So that's a little crossover to those project management, business analyst skills, technology skills coming in with financials, looking up at the cloud, or looking at internal entity management of data. We do have risk management, cybersecurity, but that's another conversation, and those are out, points beyond where we can help in controls and risk management, audit, and those type of things. Okay, point to find that you have these entities here, four financial statements being you typically have a balance sheet, income statement, cash flows, and some form of equity report, being the capital report of ownership, owner's equity, partner's equity, or stockholders' equity, depending on the entity. There's another more formal name. We're not getting formal here. We're just representing in essence what the statement is. The rest can happen elsewhere where we meet. Now with these industry lines here, the entity lines rather, the industry, the government, the small business mom and pop, or the nonprofit NGO, all is delivering some manners of good or services in support to communities where there's plenty of men, women, children, families, individuals, the whole lot out there, and it starts at the local unit and goes up to the regional, state, multi-state, federal, global, you got it. And, mom and pop might think they're only dealing with the legal element here, but in fact, their small store is really dealing with that, plus on the vendor side and logistics to the other side of the business. You've got supplies coming in from around the world. So if you're selling groceries, I was in the grocery store today, I saw that the garlic came from China. There's many points like that. There's garlic from different places. There could be bananas coming from different places, or lettuce, you name it. It's possible that anything could be coming from at home or abroad. That's also an open to a segue to a side conversation. We've got lines in agriculture and aquaculture in support of domestic, because we also need a balance of domestic agriculture and aquaculture for resiliency and for strong lines of domestic produce, but that's another point, another conversation. For these lines here, we meet on the financials. It's very simple. We think about entities and their needs and financials. Doesn't matter if you're the smallest of entities, a couple 100,000, or you're going up to the millions or billions. It's all just matters of degrees and the matters of the scope and range of services. The larger the entity is, the more you're looking into smaller teams, growing teams, or locking into an entity to an element of the financials. But we've had the experience of owning financials from the millions to the billions and to the smaller lines as well. So that's a good range of understanding to help any business in here to support the community and societal needs through the financials. And then let's just talk about a couple quick points. I wanted to keep this video short. We're reaching the 5-minute point, so let's just run through quickly some other related points. Okay, so what builds up accounting, financials, and taxation in your entity? You have those pesky receipts. Every time you spent money, you got a receipt. Some of those receipts are personal, some of them are business. The ones that are business are typically expensed on a T&E, and that rolls into your financials, starts to build up your financials. You have those banking transactions, no, not your personal ones, keep those separate, but in the business bank account that you set up for your entity, which is what you should be doing, making sure you have the formal account. In that entity there, you have a bank, and basically that deals with your entity's responsibilities, your income and your expenses and all that, ideally flowing through a clean system on one bank with strong controls built into your financials. And since we're going to talk about this, we're going to talk about this probably at the lowest level, just talk about a very small line, but it's just scalable. If you get a bigger business, there's just more people in place doing the same thing. And typically it's not until you get into much bigger lines that your financial departments are growing so expansively, or if you're in a business that has numerous transactions, like there are some businesses, in health and other sectors where you might have so many transactions that it just demands more attention. The more small dollar, high volume transactions you have, the harder it gets, the more intensive it is to human work, or unless you have some technology that's set up in a lot of ways. So I shouldn't rush into that point. Kind of depends on the technology you have. You can use statistical sampling, other things to understand more about your business. But generally, size, the volume of transactions, and the size in terms of headcount, and the size in terms of revenues, expenses, the more you have, the more it drives the needs for services, because there's more transactions and that creates more work. So down in these lines, we're getting back here, we were talking about the banking, payroll, and benefits, a very significant cycle. I think if you think about entities, the three significant costs that are going to come to me right off the top of my head are the cost of human capital, that's your people across the business working to produce things, your technology costs for the infrastructure, communications, and all of that. And that third class of costs is other class costs. So you've got your rent, you've got benefit plans, but that really covers human expenses. So you've got your rent, you've got maybe market data, equipment, who knows what you got, but you've got other lines of expenses critical to the generation of your business or your government or NGO nonprofit services to the community. All of that's rolling through your financials. So you have transaction by transaction that forms the basis for accounting. You need to capture those transactions in a double entry bookkeeping system with a debit and credit. And that debit and credit builds up financials eventually. So you have financials, which are the summary of your revenues, expenses, purchase of equipment, purchase of resources. Perhaps an investor gives you some money. Perhaps a shareholder gives you money, buys new shares. Perhaps you take out a loan. All these things are different events within accounting. And so the world of accounting is knowing how to capture loose data, which can be those receipts and all those things, and to classify it into a transactional system, how to work smart with technology, and ideally let technology do the heavy lifting, keep your mind available for analysis, but that all depends on the client choices of what systems to use, client choices of technology and how common and interoperable that technology is. Lots of different lines, so you're going to have a huge element, I guess, in speaking about that, of technology, different technology for different things like payroll, technology for order management system, for sales, contact database, all the different stuff. Could definitely be all over the place, and all that's a driver to needs in financials, accounting, taxation, controls, only because it picks up expense, and it's, if you're mapping expense, you might also want it to connect it to the value for your business. So what are the different things like payback, cash flows, analysis, profitability? How are these different lines of investments within your business with the capital you have helping your business? Because net, when we come to the entity level financials, what we really want to talk about is being efficient with resources to meet these laws and supply and demand, and to get you the most for the value that we can. That doesn't mean we're going to the cheapest price. What that means is optimize the value of the resources in your business. Find out where you might have things that are not helping you in key objectives, which we would define as growth, efficiency, and improvements, and find ways to realign that. So as part of our cost accounting and managerial skills mapped into this value equation here. If you looked over here, we talk about vendors and expenses. Your vendors come in with expenses. There's a degree of a need to understand your vendors, make sure they go through appropriate procedures, other controls, how do they come to your business, do you have contracts? That's one line of it. And then you have your credit lines out to businesses and how you're monitoring your credit, what's your cost of capital. You have capital in the lines of just capital contributions, partners' equity, shareholders' equity, things like that. And then you might have frequently leases. You're leasing office space, you don't want to buy it, or some people buy their space. But essentially, imagine you got something like a lease. That's a whole line to think about, and where our skills in commercial property come in. for research to help out from that experience. Not that we're real estate brokers or licensed in that way, but for the accounting and tax lines, it's also an element of understanding real estate costs. And then down to the last line of health, everyone's got a health plan, and that brings it back to people power potential in the services lines. We like people power potential because you want to train up your people, make them the best they can be, give them the tools with knowledge. And the last point in on the line is that all these things are factors of financials, entity-level financials. Same thing for individuals, but on smaller levels, you all have some interaction with these factors here. So I'm Dean Carson. These are simple lines on accounting, financials, and taxation. It's a little bit of a longer video than we wanted, but it covers a lot of things. Hopefully you found some interest. Any point that we raised here is something you can easily follow up under the call signs DCarsonCPA and web, and our many reporters that deal with accounting, financials, taxation, real estate, pensions, health. You name it, there's probably something out there where we've been working with research, all for the value to where we meet on services, to map in swiftly, help you to capture these line items, transactions, to get the look at your entity, whether it's industry, government, small business, nonprofit, or NGO, and to help you be more efficient with the resources, ultimately to be better at delivering goods and services, as is your mission up here, to societal needs for community with compliance. And that compliance comes from the standards on financials for GAAP and IFRS, the rules for taxation that come from the local, state, multi-state, federal lines, and then other surrounding points. There's much more DCarsonCPA lines, deep and wide. This was meant to be a simple conversation. We just take your transactions, we use them through the core of accounting to build up the basic structure. The structure of accounting maps to financials. Financials are used as a management analytical tool, and from there you prepare your taxes, and that creates the basic core lines of what we call DCarsonCPA and core financials. Glad you dropped by. Learn more on web at DCarsonCPA. I'm Dean Carson, and I appreciate your time and hope to support your needs and services. Thanks so much.